Chapter 4. Negotiations. Staring across the table at Rob, Stannis wasn't quite sure if he had heard what he had said right. He looked at the man that was seated beside his fellow monarch, his face, revealing nothing that was going on in his mind. The tension in the air was hard to ignore as the words that had come from Rob still rang in Stannis' ears, his eyes locked on Jon Snow as he mulled over what he had just been told. Before him, laid out upon the table, was the evidence that had been gathered to prove their declaration, that Jon Snow was not the bastard son of Ned Stark and some wench but the legitimate son of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. The documentation proving that the marriage was legitimate had also been found. There would be no way about this proving that they were talking about. Leaning forward in his seat, Stannis' eyes took in every inch of the paperwork that had been gathered to prove that Jon Snow was really the son of Rhaegar Targaryen. "I don't want the throne," Jon stated, making Stannis look up from the documents that were laid out before him. The room was silent, and Robb stood tall beside the man that he considered a brother. He was so thankful that Jon had trusted him enough to bring this to him. He knew that it couldn't have been easy to find out his entire life was a lie, that the man that he had called father had lied to protect him all these years. Robb couldn't imagine what had been going through Ned's mind when he had brought Jon home unable to tell anyone the truth in fear of what Robert would do if he ever found out. "You are the king. I only wishes for peace and to serve the realm however you and Robb deem fit," Jon continued on. He didn't wish for the Iron Throne, and he was contented to know where he'd come from. There was so much that he wished that he could ask Ned, that he could ask his father and understand why he had kept it all so quiet for all those years, not even telling his wife. Stannis leant back in his chair. He saw nothing of Rhaegar in the boy, and he could easily see how Ned had gotten away with this for all those years, without anyone guessing the truths. "What are your intentions, then?" Stannis asked the two men. He looked between them, curious why they had felt the need to bring this to his attention if they weren't going to use this information. Robb looked to Jon, knowing that there had been much talk about what would come from the knowledge that he was really a Targaryen, that he finally knew the truth about his heritage and where he came from. "We have an offer for you," Robb stated, knowing that this was a delicate matter. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew that the matter at hand was one that could not be ignored when they had another Targaryen on their mind. There was no denying that Daenerys was a threat that could not be ignored, but perhaps if they played their cards right then, they could find a way to unseat her claim. Stannis nodded his head for them to continue, his eyes taking in the man that he knew that Robert would have killed on the spot if he even had a hint that he was the son of his greatest rival. "You will grant him a title and lands, legitimize his claim to House Targaryen so that none will doubt the announcement, nor will they see Daenerys as a possible figurehead." Robb continued on. He looked wary at this part, and he saw a frown form on Stannis' face, knowing that this would not be easy. The entire situation was a mess. There was no easy answers, and another king would have called for Jon's head if he was given the chance to do so. Jon was the heir to a house that Robert had overthrown. He could be a focal point for others to turn to if they didn't like how Stannis was doing things, and the only thing that worked in his favor was that Jon didn't wish to be king. There was nothing in the world that would make Jon change his mind on that fact. He didn't want to be king. "He'll need to marry one of my bannerman's daughters to bind his loyalty to my house," Stannis noted, adding his own condition to the mix. He would want Jon to be completely loyal to him in all of this. There could be no one that doubted the loyalty to the new king. There would need to be something done to ensure that Jon could not usurp the throne from Stannis and restore House Targaryen to power. "Done," Jon stated without hesitation. He didn't even look at Robb as he agreed to the condition that Stannis had. He would do anything to prove that he was not a threat, and he had no desire for the Iron Throne. All Jon wanted was peace after what he had been through at the Night's Watch. He had done his duty, and once the realm was secure from the White Walkers, then he would be contented. "And to ensure a connection between our own houses, I suggest a match between the Queen's brother Destin and my daughter Shireen," Stannis bargained, looking to Robb, knowing that it was something that had been discussed prior to this meeting, and he felt ready to make a deal. Shireen needed a husband from a good house, one that had no claim to anything, and would be a supportive figure at her side when she came to the throne once Stannis had passed. Destin was no longer heir since the birth of Arthur's sons, Corran and Destin too, meaning that there was nothing for the older Destin back at Airedale now. He was a young man that had nothing to lose by coming south. At 16 years old, he had plenty of time to grow into his role as the future prince consort of Shireen, and Stannis would ensure that. The boy knew his place in all of this. I am sure Lord Tremaine will be in agreement of such an offer for his younger brother, Robb stated diplomatically. He didn't feel like he could say no to Stannis' request in fear of what that might mean for Jon. Destin was a quiet boy. He was currently serving as a ward just like Roland had wanted before the war had started, and he rode often the Senora of Offs, his time and wishing to come home when he could. Stannis nodded his head at Robb before he focused back on Jon, his mind putting together a plan knowing that they had to tread carefully or risk a Targaryen civil war in the future. The room was silent while Stannis gathered his thoughts. It was not a discussion that he had thought he would be having when Robb had requested a private meeting that morning. Fine. The tourney was on everyone's minds. It was the entire reason that they were here at River Run, and Stannis knew that the Daenerys problem was one on the forefront of their minds since it had become clear that she planned to return to Westeros. If legitimizing the son of Rhaegar was going to damage Daenerys' claim, then it couldn't hurt to have Jon on their side in all of this, especially since the boy had been raised by Ned Stark and would be true to his word. In lieu of your loyalty to House Baratheon and swearing so, you shall be granted the title Lord of Dragonstone, and I shall gift you the ancestral home of your father, Stannis stated with a nod of his head. There would be a new title created for the heir to the throne, lands gifted much closer than Dragonstone, and Stannis was sure that having Shireen at court would bolster her potential. He would not make the same mistakes as King Viserys. He would not have his designated heir unprepared to rule, nor away from court, when she was learning the role that she would one day be given. Jon nodded his head, not knowing what to say to such an offer. A part of him had been convinced that Robb's plan to be upfront with Stannis about his heritage would backfire and end with his execution and all-out war. Then there is nothing else to discuss. We'll have a ceremony to confirm you once everything else has been arranged, Stannis stated, getting to his feet. He had other things to be doing this day, and he knew that there was much to be discussed. Robb nodded his head. He was sure that Senira was eager to hear how the meeting had gone, and he knew boys were full of energy since they had arrived at River Run. What do we call you now, anyway? Stannis asked, turning to look at Jon before he left the room, his eyes taking in the man that was clearly more Stark than Targaryen, and he knew that without the evidence no one would believe such a story. Jon hesitated for a moment, his eyes casting down to the papers before he met Stannis' gaze and repeated the name that he had been given by his mother. Daeron. My name is Daeron Targaryen.